Why was a simple polishing cloth making her hands shake? The brass caught the light in sharp, golden flashes as Blake worked methodically across its surface, just as she had done 1,000 times before. To anyone else, it was routine. Just another round among thousands stacked in wooden crates and steel racks. To her, it was ritual. She made peace with being meticulous, every surface wiped down, every casing logged, every box squared with the precision of someone who needed order to survive. But then came the pause. One round sat slightly apart from the others as if someone had nudged it forward on purpose. She frowned, leaned closer. Perfect casing, perfect weight, no flaws she could see, and yet something about it tugged at her, quiet, insistent. The morning silence of the depot pressed around her, broken only by the soft rasp of cloth against brass. At 26, Blake was not where she thought she'd be. 4 years earlier, she'd worn a different uniform. Combat medic, Afghanistan, blood in the dirt, radios screaming for evacuation. A split-second explosion had shattered more than her leg. It had ended her dream of saving lives on the surgeons patched her together with pins and steel. She walked again, even past the physicals. But combat medicine wasn't just walking. It was sprinting, crawling, lifting bodies heavier than your own. It was never letting your squad wonder if you'd falter. Her command had been kind, clinical. You're cleared for duty, Petty Officer Blake, just not that duty. So here she was, behind reinforced doors at Naval Base, counting rounds instead of carrying tourniquets. She told herself she liked it. The calm, the order, the safety of numbers in neat columns, and most days she almost believed it. The depot smelled faintly of oil and salt air, the Pacific just beyond the chain-link fences and armed checkpoints. 7:45 a.m., the best hour, before the waves of operators came knocking for their ammo requisitions, before the chaos of forms and signatures, before the chatter of men and women who had something she had lost: purpose. Here, in the quiet, she could almost forget the limp in her stride, the dull ache that came with cold mornings. Her cloth moved again, small circles, polished brass, a meditation. That's when she heard it. Boots, hard even, coming down the concrete corridor, not the shuffle of supply clerks or the lazy stride of admin staff. This was deliberate. She straightened, the round still warm in her palm. Morning. The voice was calm, deep, trained to cut through noise without needing volume. She turned. A tall man filled the doorway, naval special warfare fatigues pressed but worn, dark hair cropped short, eyes scanning the room the way a hawk might scan a field. Not just looking, cataloging, measuring, calculating. She'd seen plenty of sailors come through her depot. None carried themselves like this. "Good morning," she said, setting the round back into its foam cradle with a care she didn't fully understand. She tugged her cap lower, squared her shoulders. "Petty Officer Blake, can I help you with something, Chief?" He stepped inside, extending a hand. The grip was firm, calloused, years of rope, rifles, and rock under his skin. "Chief Petty Officer, SEAL Team 3, just making the rounds. Thought I'd take a look at how you keep all this squared away." Most SEALs had no reason to stop by personally. Ammunition requests ran through paperwork, officers, channels. She tried to read his face. He wasn't here for forms. His eyes were already drifting to the racks, the crates, the way everything had its place. "Well," she said with a small smile, "you don't get many SEALs down here, Chief. Mostly it's me, the coffee, and about 2,000 inventory sheets." He chuckled, not forced, not patronizing, just enough to let her guard dip a fraction. Moved slowly through the depot, casual in pace but not in purpose. His gaze lingered on labels, calibers, dates, lot numbers. He wasn't skimming, he was assessing. And she realized with a strange ripple of unease that he wasn't here to admire her filing system. "How long have you been running this place?" he asked. 4 years next month, she replied. "Started right after rehab." She hesitated. She hated saying it. The story of her leg always hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. She softened it. "Afghanistan. Injury cut my first career short. Turns out counting bullets has its own comfort. She meant it lightly. He didn't take it lightly. His nod was slow, measured, the nod of someone who'd seen too many dreams cut short. Drifted closer to the workbench, to her crate, to the rounds she'd just polished. She noticed his eyes pause, narrow, lock on. That's some specialized stuff you've got here. Her heart ticked faster, though she didn't know why. She gestured at the crate. Sniper rounds, precision manufacturing. Honestly, I couldn't tell you half of what goes into making them work. I just make sure they stay clean until someone like you comes to take them away. She expected him to nod and move on. He didn't. He leaned in, studied the rows. His hand hovered over the foam. Then, with the respect of someone touching a relic, he picked up the very round she'd felt unsettled by. "This one," he murmured. She frowned. "They all look the same to me." "Not this one." The way he said it made the air heavier. Held it up to the light, turned it slowly. His jaw tightened. She noticed it, the subtle shift from casual inspection to something else. Reverence, alarm, both. He beckoned her closer. "Do you see that?" His fingertip traced a tiny groove near the base. She squinted. Brass, codes, manufacturing stamps. Normal, but then there, barely visible. Microscopic letters etched in a way no factory would bother with. She leaned so close their shoulders nearly brushed. "I can barely read it. What does it say?" He was silent for a moment. Then, almost too softly, as though the words themselves were dangerous. "One shot, 1 mile." She froze. The phrase hit the air like a cold wind. Not bravado. Not some slogan printed on a t-shirt. The way he said it, measured, reverent, almost fearful, told her it meant something else. Her voice came out quieter than she meant. "What does that mean?" Set the round down slowly, as if careless movement might summon something unseen. His gaze didn't leave it. "It's a legend, a mark, not for mass production, for recognition." Recognition. The word struck her deeper than she expected. Recognition for what? Finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the weight of things unspoken. There are snipers whose existence isn't on paper, not in reports, not in databases Congress gets to read. When someone makes a confirmed kill at a mile or more sometimes, they're given a round like this, a commemorative, a stamp of what only a handful of humans have ever done. Her stomach twisted. She glanced down at the case, at the polished brass she had treated like any other supply item. Now it seemed to hum with unseen weight. Evidence, proof, death packaged in gold. "How many people could make a shot like that?" she whispered. Didn't hesitate. Less than a dozen, maybe fewer. Silence pooled between them. In that silence felt two truths collide. One, she was holding a piece of history, of myth. Two, it wasn't meant for her hands. And she couldn't shake the thought, the most dangerous one of all. If this round was here, hidden in plain sight among routine inventory, who had put it there? And why? What kind of story could fit inside a single piece of brass? Found herself staring at the round long after had set it down, the words echoing in her mind. 1 shot, 1 mile. It looked like any other round, smooth and ordinary, but now it throbbed with meaning. A kill a mile away. A shot so precise that only myth spoke of it. And she, Petty Officer Blake, who spent her days polishing casings, was the one holding it. She felt small. His expression hadn't softened since. His shoulders carried a tightness she hadn't noticed before, the kind that came when a man saw something he wished he hadn't. She tried to find words, but her throat tightened. "Why would it be here?" she asked finally, her voice almost a whisper. His jaw flexed. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the door as though measuring whether shadows might be listening. When his eyes returned to her, they were sharper, weighted. "That's the question, isn't it?" Pulled back slightly, crossing her arms. She wasn't the type to be intimidated. At least she told herself that. But the way he looked at her now made her feel like she had stumbled onto something bigger than she was supposed to see. "I'm supposed to log inventory," she said defensively. I'm not supposed to decode legends. Studied her for a moment. Then he gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Don't undersell yourself. You noticed it. Not everyone would. Her cheeks flushed, though she wasn't sure if it was pride or fear. The depot's silence pressed in again, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. Somewhere outside, voices echoed, sailors moving between buildings, the ordinary rhythm of the bass continuing as if the world hadn't just shifted under her feet. She cleared her throat. Should I report it? That was the wrong question. She knew it the moment his eyes narrowed, leaned against the steel frame of a nearby rack, arms crossed as though weighing more than just the words. Reporting it, he said slowly, might draw attention you don't want, attention no one wants. She hated how vague he sounded. She hated even more the truth in it. Her job was rules, procedures, checklists. She lived by them because they gave her a sense of control she had lost when the blast in Afghanistan had ripped it away. But this was outside the margins. No field manual had ever told her what to do if she stumbled across something not supposed to exist. Pushed away from the rack, stepping closer again. You want my advice? She swallowed. Do I? His lips twitched. Maybe amusement, maybe pity. Treat it like it belongs here, like it's just another round in another crate because whoever put it here, they wanted it found, but not by everyone, by the right person, at the right time. A chill ran up her spine. She hated riddles, hated how the words felt heavy with meaning but gave her no clarity. You're saying it's deliberate. I'm saying nothing in our world happens by accident. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She wanted to grab the round again, to hold it, to test its weight as if that might reveal more. But she didn't. Instead, she met his gaze. And why you? Why now? His eyes softened just slightly. For a moment she saw past the hardened seal exterior to something more fragile, weariness. A man who'd carried too many secrets for too long. Because I've seen it before, once, years ago, different theater, different operator. The round looked the same inscription, same silence that followed. He didn't elaborate, but she caught the shadow in his expression. Someone he'd lost, maybe. Someone whose story ended with a legend carved into brass. She wanted to ask, she didn't. Instead, she felt a strange mix of awe and resentment. Awe at the weight of what she'd uncovered. Resentment that she was being dragged into something without choice. She'd come to love the armory because it was simple, controlled, safe. Now it didn't feel safe at all. Finally set the round back in its place, nestling it carefully in the foam as though it were fragile glass. His hand lingered for a second before pulling back. I need to go, he said, voice low. You never saw me here, understood? Her jaw tightened. She didn't like being ordered. But his tone wasn't sharp, it was protective, almost pleading. She gave the smallest nod. Good. He turned and left, boots fatting down the concrete corridor. Exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The depot suddenly felt too quiet, the walls too close. She leaned on the workbench, staring at the round. 1 shot, 1 mile. It should have been nothing more than brass and powder, but now it pulsed in her mind like a secret heartbeat. The rest of the morning blurred. Soldiers came and went, requisition forms signed, crates unlocked and relocked. Went through the motions, hands steady but mind restless. Every time she passed that crate, her eyes betrayed her, sliding back to the round as if it might move when she wasn't watching. By early afternoon, word was already spreading. Not about the round, thank God, but about a seal in the depot was always news. Colleagues leaned in with knowing smiles, whispering speculation. Security inspection. Some new op loading up. Heard he was checking the seals on our storage racks. She smiled politely, gave vague answers. Just a routine visit, nothing out of the ordinary. The lie burned her throat, but what else could she say? It was only as she was preparing to close her shift that the second knock came. Not boots this time. Heels, crisp, precise. and when she looked up, Lieutenant Commander Sarah stood in the doorway. The base's intelligence officer. His posture radiated authority, chin high, eyes sharp, uniform immaculate. She was known for two things: never wasting words and never missing details. If she was here, it wasn't casual. Petty Officer Blake said evenly, "I understand you had a visit from SEAL Team 3 this morning." His chest tightened. Her hands instinctively brushed against her uniform to steady herself. "Yes, ma'am, Chief." He inspected the facility. His gaze flicked past her, scanning the racks, the crates, the neat labels. Then it settled on again. And he was particularly interested in some specialized sniper ammunition, was he not? Her blood ran cold. Didn't Blink show me? Why did already know where to look? Led her across the depot floor, each step echoing in her chest as much as in the room. The intelligence officer's pace was steady, unhurried, as if she had already anticipated what she was about to see. Hated that feeling, the sense that she was one step behind, merely carrying out an inevitable script. She stopped at the workbench. The crate sat open, brass gleaming under fluorescent light, waiting. She felt exposed, like the ammunition itself was staring back at her. "This round," said, forcing her voice steady, pointing to the one had examined. "Chief handled this one in particular. Didn't touch it immediately." She studied the crate's arrangement, the separation of the single round from the others. Then, with precise movements, she picked it up between gloved fingers and tilted it toward the light. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the casing. She didn't squint. She didn't hesitate. She went straight to the base of the round where the tiny inscription lay hidden. "One shot, 1 mile," she read aloud almost clinically. Her tone carried no surprise, no discovery, only confirmation. Stomach dropped. "You already knew." Set the round down carefully, as if placing evidence into a courtroom. She met's eyes, voice even. "I expected it." Expected it. Two words that made feel the floor tilt beneath her. Her throat went dry. What does it mean? Didn't answer immediately. She began walking along the workbench, fingertips brushing the edges of other crates as though gauging their weight without lifting them. "What do you think it means, petty officer?" Clenched her jaw. She hated questions like that, the kind that made you feel small for not knowing the answer. "I think it means I've got something in my facility that doesn't belong here, something I wasn't briefed on, and I think I'm the one holding the bag if this goes wrong." For the first time, a flicker of amusement touched his eyes. "You're sharper than most give you credit for." That stung more than it reassured. Circled back, leaning one hip against the steel bench, arms folded. "You're right. It doesn't belong here, at least not in any official sense. Ammunition like this, commemorative ammunition to be precise, exists outside the paperwork you process every day. It's not sanctioned, but it's real." Commemorative, the word caught like a burr. "You mean like a trophy?" "A recognition," corrected. "Elite snipers who achieve confirmed kills beyond a mile sometimes receive a round marked with that accomplishment, not as an award you'd find in a ceremony, as a quiet acknowledgement within certain circles. It builds culture, legacy, the kind of things official channels can't capture." Stared at the round, bile rising in her throat. "You're telling me this is a keepsake, someone's personal token, sitting in my supply chain?" "Yes." She shook her head, anger tightening her chest. "That's insane. Something this sensitive shouldn't just be floating around, shouldn't even exist." "Agreed," said simply. The calmness in her voice unnerved more than anything. If agreed, why wasn't she alarmed? Why wasn't she calling in teams with gloves and scanners and red tape? "Then how did it end up here?" pressed, her voice sharper than she intended. His expression didn't shift. "That's exactly what I'm trying to determine." The weight of those words landed heavily. Realized what was happening. She wasn't just a clerk in this situation anymore. She was part of an investigation, maybe even a suspect. Her hands curled into fists, Am I in trouble? His posture softened by a fraction, enough to let a sliver of humanity break through. No, quite the opposite. You've handled this correctly so far. You didn't broadcast it. You didn't overreact. That shows judgment, but her eyes sharpened again. It does mean your life just became more complicated. Wanted to laugh bitterly. Complicated. The word felt like a gross understatement. Straightened. I'll need you to check your entire inventory. Every round, every crate. Look for similar markings. They'll be tiny, hidden. But if there's one, there may be more. Felt her knees weaken. You want me to go through everything? There are thousands of rounds here. Then you'd better get started. It wasn't cruelty. It was necessity. But still, his heart sank. The depot, once her sanctuary, suddenly looked monstrous. Rows and rows of crates now looming like unreadable books, each one possibly holding a secret that could unravel careers or worse. She drew a shaky breath. Why me? Tilted her head slightly. Because you've already seen one. Because you know what to look for now. And because whoever is placing them here clearly trusts you to notice. That last sentence punched through his chest. Trust you to notice. What did that even mean? She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't earned this. And yet, some invisible hand had set her on this path. Reached the door but paused, glancing back. I'll be in touch. Keep me updated on your progress. And then she was gone. Sank onto the stool by the workbench, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. Her heart thumped unevenly, her breath ragged. She thought of her old life, dust, blood, chaos. She thought she'd traded it for order, for peace. Now it was slipping back, the sense that danger didn't need bullets or blasts. Sometimes danger came in whispers etched into brass. Her eyes lifted to the round again. She hated it. Hated the way it sat there, gleaming, smug in its silence. And yet she couldn't look away. Hours bled into the evening as she began her inspection. Round by round, crate by crate. She worked with magnification, gloves, patience. The depot grew colder, the silence pressing heavier, but she pressed on. She told herself it was about professionalism, about doing her duty. But deep down she knew she needed to know, needed to uncover what else lay hidden in plain sight. 2 hours in, her hand froze mid-motion. There it was. Another round, tucked into a crate of standard rifle ammunition, indistinguishable until tilted just so under the lamp. A marking etched so finely it might as well have been a whisper. 2 words, cobbled dawn. Her breath hitched, coordinates etched beneath. A place. A time. She didn't recognize it, but the weight was clear. Another story, another death, another ghost in brass. Her pulse raced as she logged it, as had ordered. She stared at the words until they blurred, and for the first time she realized. This wasn't an accident. Someone was planting them. And she was being forced to play along. How many secrets could be hidden inside a warehouse of brass? The question burned in his chest as she lifted another round beneath the inspection lamp. Hours had passed since visit, and still the depot felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that made every creak of steel sound like a warning. The second round, cobbled dawn, sat logged in her ledger, coordinates etched into brass like a scar. She couldn't shake the chill that came with it. Not random, not coincidence. Someone had placed it with intention. And then she found the third. This one nestled deep in a box of .308 rounds, nearly invisible unless you tilted the casing just so. The words etched into the brass were faint but deliberate. Silent River. No coordinates this time. Just a name, a maybe, a memory disguised as metal. Set it down gently, heart thudding. She should felt proud of her discovery, the meticulous attention to detail that had caught what others might miss. Instead, she felt sick, as though each inscription etched itself into her skin. By the time returned that evening had logged 2 more, 4 in total, each different, each too specific to dismiss. Didn't flinch when she saw them arranged neatly on the workbench. If anything, her composure seemed to deepen. She inspected them one by one, her gloved fingers steady, her expression unreadable. "This is becoming a pattern," she murmured. His voice cracked despite herself. "What do they mean?" Didn't look up. "They mean someone wants us to remember what official history would rather forget." The words chilled more than the rounds themselves. Finally set the last round down and straightened, her gaze sharp. "You understand what this suggests?" "That someone's planting them," said her voice low, "on purpose." "Correct, across multiple facilities most likely. Your depot is just one node in a larger network, which means," paused, letting the implication hang. Swallowed hard, "which means I'm part of it." His eyes softened just slightly. "Not by choice, but yes, someone selected you, trusted you to notice." The phrase again, trusted. It gnawed at like rust. She wanted to scream she hadn't asked for this, that she just wanted her clean inventory sheets and quiet mornings. But deep down she knew, her meticulousness, her refusal to cut corners, the very traits that made her feel small in a world of warriors, were the same traits that had made her useful. She was chosen because she would notice, because she would care. Pulled a small tablet from her bag, snapping photos of the rounds, the etchings, the crate numbers. Her voice stayed level as she spoke. "I'll need to expand this investigation beyond your walls. If there are 4 here, there may be dozens elsewhere. Hundreds." The word hundreds made stomach turn. Each one wasn't just metal, it was blood, memory, myth. How many lives, how many shadows carved into brass? Must have sensed her unease. "Don't misunderstand. These aren't trophies for killing. They're markers of survival, of achievement under impossible conditions. But the way they're appearing now," she trailed off, eyes narrowing, "it's deliberate, coordinated, and we don't yet know why." Nodded, though her hands trembled as she logged remarks into her system. The night dragged into long hours. Together, they pulled crates, examined rounds under magnification, checked serials and foam inserts. Shoulders ached, her eyes burned, but she pressed on. She felt like she was digging not through crates but through time itself, unearthing stories buried too deep to surface any other way. By midnight they had 6, each with its own whisper of a story. One Shot 1 Mile, Kabul Dawn, Silent River, Iron Winter, Falcon's Gate, No Return. Each one etched in brass so fine it was almost invisible. Each one set deliberately apart in its crate, waiting. Arranged them in a neat line across the bench, studying them like puzzle pieces. Leaned against the steel racks, exhausted but unable to stop staring. "They're like gravestones," she muttered. Glanced up, "or signposts, depends on who you ask." His voice was bitter. "And what happens to me? I'm just supposed to keep stacking boxes while ghosts crawl out of them." His tone softened, rare for her. "You're not just stacking boxes anymore, petty officer. You're part of a story larger than yourself. That can be terrifying, but it can also be purpose." The word purpose cut deeper than she expected. She hadn't realized until now how much she craved it, how much the medic in her still longed to matter. But before she could answer, his phone buzzed. She turned away, voice clipped, coded. Caught only fragments. Confirmed multiple facilities, yes, similar inscriptions, expanding scope. When she hung up, her expression was harder than ever. "It's not just here. Reports are coming in from 3 other bases. Same pattern." Felt her chest hollow out. "So this is bigger than both of us." "Much bigger," said quietly. The room went still again. The crates loomed larger, like silent witnesses. For the first time, wondered if she should stayed broken on that field in Afghanistan, spared from the weight of secrets she was never meant to hold. But the thought passed quickly, chased by something fiercer. No, she was here. She was alive. And maybe, just maybe, her quiet persistence mattered in ways she hadn't imagined. As dawn crept faintly through the high windows, gathered her notes. "You'll continue logging, quietly. I'll coordinate the wider net. But Blake." Looked up, weary but alert. His eyes held hers with unusual gravity. You understand now, this isn't just ammunition, it's history someone doesn't want erased. Handle it as such." When she left, the depot fell silent again, slumped into the stool, staring at the 6 rounds lined across the workbench. 6 tiny inscriptions, 6 untold stories. And in the quiet, one truth settled heavily in her chest. She wasn't guarding brass anymore. She was guarding memory. What happens when the quiet person in the corner suddenly finds everyone watching? Had never been the center of anything. Not in the army, not after the blast, not here in the depot. She liked it that way, her space, her lists, her order. But now, the stillness she once clung to had turned against her. The rounds, 6 of them, each carved with whispers of operations never meant to surface. 6 pieces of brass had cracked open her sanctuary, and now the world was pouring in. By morning, the depot looked different. Not physically, same crates, same steel racks, same faint scent of oil. But the air buzzed with tension, with the constant hum of footsteps and clipped voices. Investigators had arrived. Security officers in dark uniforms, intelligence analysts hunched over magnifiers, even civilian contractors with laptops spilling cables across her workbenches. And she was suddenly not just the keeper of inventory, but the accidental gatekeeper of something larger. Colleagues passed by whispering, "Blake found something. Blake," in the middle of it, "she's working with intel." Some looked at her with envy, others with suspicion. She tried to ignore it, focusing on paperwork and routine tasks, but nothing felt routine anymore. By noon, the base commander herself walked in. Major General, a name spoken with both respect and fear across. Tall, silver-haired, her presence alone seemed to stiffen the air. "Petty Officer Blake," said, her voice crisp as boots on concrete. "I've reviewed preliminary reports. You've handled yourself with discretion. That's commendable." Snapped to attention, heart hammering, "Thank you, ma'am." His gaze swept the facility, landing briefly on the lined-up commemorative rounds. Her expression didn't change, but her silence carried weight. When she finally spoke again, her tone was quieter, almost reflective. "These represent more than engineering, more than brass. They represent capability and risk. What you found here touches on matters far beyond this base, and your name will now be tied to that discovery." The words struck like a verdict. Your name will be tied. She had never wanted her name tied to anything. "Yes, ma'am," she managed. His eyes softened, but only slightly. "I know what it means to have a career shift under your feet. You didn't ask for this, but you've proven steady. That steadiness will be tested." The general left soon after, trailed by aides and officers, leaving with her pulse still racing. That night her apartment felt suffocating. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at her dinner but not tasting it. The hum of her fridge filled the silence, mocking her with its ordinary rhythm. She thought of her old nightmares, the blast in Afghanistan, the sudden weight of bodies, the ringing silence after impact. She learned to bury those memories under routines, under the careful order of inventory logs. Now new ghosts pressed in, the tiny etchings. The phrase had whispered, "1 shot, 1 mile." She pushed her plate away. Sleep didn't come easy. The following days blurred into interrogations and inspections. Every file she'd signed, every shipment she'd logged was combed through. Teams traced supply chains, interviewed staff, demanded explanations she didn't have. Answered what she could, holding fast to the truth. She'd noticed because she was trained to notice. Nothing more, nothing less. But the weight grew heavier. One afternoon returned, not as casually as before, but summoned. He stepped into the depot as though it hadn't changed, though his eyes betrayed recognition of the new chaos. "Blake," he greeted, his tone softer than she remembered. "Looks like you've stirred up a storm." She smirked faintly, exhausted. "I didn't stir anything, I just polished brass." He studied her for a long moment, then leaned against the rack beside her. Funny how often the people who think they're doing nothing end up doing the most. She didn't answer. She couldn't. His presence stirred something she couldn't place, comfort maybe, or warning. She thought again of the way he had handled that first round, reverence laced with dread. Later that evening, pulled her aside. The intelligence officer looked even more drawn than usual, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "It's bigger than we thought," said flatly. "We've traced similar rounds across multiple installations, East Coast, overseas. Whoever's doing this understands the logistics system too well. They're threading ghosts into the fabric of our supply chain." Exhaled slowly, "And I'm what, the test case?" Studied her. "You're the one who noticed. That makes you valuable. It also makes you vulnerable. People will want answers from you. Some will want to use you. Some might want you silent." The words landed like a blow. Silent. She thought of the quiet she used to crave. It didn't feel safe anymore. That night when she finally lay down, her thoughts refused to rest. She wondered if she should just kept her head down, logged the crates, ignored the odd separation of a single round. But she knew she couldn't have. Her medic's instincts, her stubborn need for precision, they wouldn't have let her. And maybe that was the part. She hadn't chosen this, but it felt like it had chosen her. By the end of the week, the depot was no longer hers. It was evidence. Teams cycled through, carrying boxes out for analysis, scanning every inch. She moved among them, assisting when asked, but mostly standing in the background as her sanctuary was dissected. The whispers among her colleagues grew louder. Some avoided her, afraid of the attention. Others leaned in, asking for details she couldn't share. She smiled, deflected, kept her silence. But deep inside, she wondered. When the dust settled, would she still be Blake, the meticulous clerk? Or would she be something else now, something forged in secrets she hadn't asked to keep? On Friday afternoon, as she was leaving the depot, she caught sight of speaking quietly with near the command building. Both women looked serious, their body language tight. At one point gestured toward the depot, then toward herself, her expression unreadable. Felt a chill crawl up her spine. Decisions were being made, about the rounds, about the network, about her. She turned away before they could notice her watching, the weight of their unseen choices pressing against her ribs. Walking back to her apartment, she realized the quiet streets of no longer felt like home. They felt like staging grounds, like every shadow might hold another watcher, another secret. And for the first time, admitted something she hadn't dared before. She wasn't just polishing brass anymore. She was standing in the crosshairs of history. When did counting bullets turn into tracking ghosts across continents? 3 months after that first inscription, one shot. One milesat in a secure conference room in Northern Virginia, the kind of place she'd only ever seen in movies. No windows, white walls, a clock that ticked too loudly. She still wasn't used to the badge around her neck. Defense Intelligence Agency, classified access. She wasn't used to the way analysts and officers glanced at her, whispering her name with curiosity, with expectation. The depot was behind her now. She had been transferred out, given a role in intelligence logistics. Her replacement, an older petty officer with security clearances carved into his career, had taken over her former sanctuary. She hadn't even said goodbye to the racks and crates. She couldn't. They weren't hers anymore. Now her work was here. Files, images, evidence boards littered with maps and red strings. And the words she couldn't escape, written at the top of the board: commemorative ammunition, unauthorized distribution. Colonel Harrison, the task force commander, tapped the board with a blunt finger. These are showing up where they shouldn't: Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, black market bazaars in back alleys and private collections of foreign officials. They're not just mementos anymore. They're currency and intelligence. The colonel's gaze swept the room. And make no mistake, every one of these rounds is worth more than gold to our adversaries. Not for the brass itself, for what it represents. Proof of capability, proof of reach, and in the wrong hands, proof of vulnerability. Stomach turned. She thought of the 6 she'd logged in. quiet, deliberate, haunting, and now others were scattered across the globe, traded like contraband. Her role was technical, analyzing the markings, tracing the supply chains, finding where the rounds had slipped from military hands into shadows. But her heart told her something more. Each round was a story, a person, a shot taken under impossible conditions. And now those stories were being sold to the highest bidder. After the briefing, found her in the corridor. The intelligence officer looked even sharper in this world, her posture honed by classified rooms and silent stakes. "You're adapting," said without preamble. Tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "I still feel like I'm just supposed to be counting boxes." His eyes softened slightly. "And yet you're the only one in this room who recognized what those boxes meant. Don't forget that." Before could answer, a familiar voice cut in. "Blake." She turned, stood there in civilian clothes, now dark jacket, jeans. The lack of uniform made him look more dangerous, not less. His presence tugged at something in her chest she couldn't name. "Chief," she said automatically, then corrected herself. He gave a small smile. "Old habits die hard." Nodded to him. "Been consulting. He has contacts in places we don't." Frowned. "Contacts?" "Private military contractors, arms dealers, security outfits, the gray market," explained. "I've seen these rounds turning up where they shouldn't, display cases in offices of people who shouldn't have access, even in the hands of mercenaries bragging about trophies they didn't earn." The anger in his voice was unmistakable. His pulse quickened. "So it's not just accidental leaks, it's deliberate theft." "Worse," said grimly. "It's targeted. Someone's picking these rounds specifically, pulling them out of supply chains and moving them across borders. They know exactly what they're worth." His eyes met. "And that's why you're here. We need your eye, your attention to detail. These rounds aren't just evidence, they're fingerprints. You can see what others miss." Wanted to protest. She wasn't a spy, wasn't an operator. She was a clerk who used to polish brass to keep her hands busy. But the truth pressed against her ribs. She couldn't walk away now, not when she knew what was at stake. Her days shifted into nights of endless analysis. Magnifying glass in hand, she pored over rounds seized from raids in Romania, Turkey, and beyond. She traced manufacturing quirks back to specific contractors, serial mismatches back to supply depots. She was building maps of theft, of betrayal. And with every new round, she felt the ghosts heavier. Names she didn't know, coordinates she couldn't speak aloud, etched into brass by hands that had wanted these moments remembered, even if the world pretended they didn't exist. One evening found her still at her desk, eyes red, shoulders hunched. He leaned on the doorframe, watching her for a long moment before speaking. "You're carrying it," he said quietly. She looked up confused. "Carrying what?" "The weight of what they mean, of what they cost." Her throat tightened. "Someone has to." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Be careful, Blake. You can drown in ghosts if you're not careful." She met his gaze, something steely rising in her. Maybe they deserve someone to drown for them. The silence between them crackled, heavy with truths neither wanted to say. Weeks later, the task force broke open a case. A Belgian arms dealer named, operating out of Brussels, selling commemorative rounds alongside stolen rifles and encrypted radios. His collection was vast, his buyers global. The evidence pointed to a network inside the military, corrupt supply officers diverting shipments. Forensic work tied it all together. The subtle manufacturing anomalies, the altered serials, the markings that only she seemed to notice. Without her, the case would have been smoke. With her, it became fire. When was finally raided, millions of dollars of stolen equipment were seized. Dozens arrested. Sat in the operations center as the reports came in, her chest tight with relief and fear. Relief that her work had mattered. Fear that for every, there were 10 more waiting. That night she walked back to her quarters under a cold Virginia sky. She looked up at the stars and thought about distance, about a mile, about shots taken across valleys, through wind and dust, by men and women whose names would never be spoken. And she realized something that stopped her breath. The rounds weren't just stories of the past. They were still being written, still being traded, still moving in the dark. And somewhere out there, someone was watching her just as closely as she was watching them. When did the shadows start following her home? First noticed it on a Tuesday night. She was leaving the DIA complex, badge clipped to her bag, jacket pulled tight against the chill. The parking lot was nearly empty, her footsteps echoing. And then another set of footsteps. She turned quickly. Nothing but rows of cars glinting under the sodium lamps. Still, the hairs on her neck prickled. She told herself she was tired. She told herself it was nothing. But 2 days later, she found her apartment door ajar. Nothing stolen, nothing disturbed, just unlocked as if someone had wanted her to know they could come and go. Her pulse had thundered in her ears as she swept the small space, every corner, every shadow. She ended up sitting on her bed, head in her hands, whispering to herself, "It's fine. You're fine, just tired, just jumpy." But she wasn't fine. She knew what it meant. By the weekend, confirmed it. The task force's cyber team intercepted chatter. Someone had identified her. Not as a random clerk, not as a faceless analyst. By name, by face, Blake. "They know who you are," said, voice steady but eyes sharp. "That means they know what you've done, and that makes you a target." Stomach sank. "I'm not even on the front lines." Lips tightened. "You're on the kind of front line that scares people more. You connect the dots. You make their shadows visible. They can't let that continue." The next days blurred into security protocols. Escorts to and from the building. A guard posted near her apartment. Briefings on emergency signals, panic buttons, safe houses. And yet the fear didn't fade. It followed her like breath. One evening, as she left a late meeting, appeared beside her car. He leaned casually against it, arms crossed, but his eyes were sharp. "Says they flagged you," he said. Gave a brittle laugh. "You think?" He studied her, his expression unreadable. "How are you holding up?" She wanted to say fine, wanted to shrug it off with a medic's stubbornness. But instead the truth spilled out. "I hate it. I hate looking over my shoulder. I hate waiting for something to happen. I was supposed to have peace. That's why I took this job. That's why I left Afghanistan." Nodded slowly. "Peace is fragile. You of all people should know that." Her voice cracked. "And what if I break? What if I'm not built for this?" He stepped closer, his presence steady, grounding. "Blake, none of us are built for this. We just endure it. That's the difference." The words sank deep. Endure. She thought of the ghosts carved into brass. They hadn't chosen either. They'd endured, and maybe that was enough. 2 nights later, her endurance was tested. She was working late at her apartment, magnifying photos of confiscated rounds when the power cut. Darkness swallowed the room. Silence pressed in. Her hand shot for the drawer, flashlight, panic button. The beam of light cut through the dark just in time to catch movement at the window. A shadow, a figure slipping away. Her breath hitched, adrenaline surged. She hit the panic button. Minutes stretched like hours until pounding boots thundered up the stairwell. Security agents swept in, flashlights blinding, weapons raised. The apartment was cleared. No intruder found. But the message was clear. They could reach her whenever they wanted. Came that night, called in by. He stood in her kitchen, arms crossed, his jaw tight as he listened to her recount the flicker of movement at the window. "They're probing," he said grimly. "Testing your reactions. Next time won't be a warning." Gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "So what am I supposed to do? Keep waiting, keep being afraid?" His gaze locked on hers. "No, you keep doing your job, you don't stop. That's how you beat them. They want silence. You don't give it to them." His certainty steadied her more than the presence of armed guards outside. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, lamp casting a small circle of light, staring at the rounds she'd been analyzing. Tiny inscriptions, each one a whisper of courage, of survival, and she realized the ghosts weren't just haunting her. They were urging her to endure, to keep going. The next morning she walked into the task force office with her head high, though her hands still trembled. Noticed, but neither said a word. Instead slid a file toward her. New intercept, shipment flagged in Istanbul, commemorative rounds included. You'll lead the analysis. His breath caught. Lead, not assist, not support, lead. She nodded, gripping the file. I'll handle it. As the day wore on, she worked with a focus she hadn't felt in weeks. The fear was still there, always there, but it had shifted. It was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. But that night, as she left the building, she felt it again. The eyes, the weight of someone watching. She turned sharply, scanning the shadows. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw him, the same figure from her window, still, waiting. Her breath caught, she blinked, he was gone. And in the silence, one thought pressed cold against her chest. The ghosts weren't the only ones watching now. What if the final piece of the puzzle carried her name? Stared at the intercepted manifests, fingers trembling slightly as she traced the codes. The Istanbul shipment was massive, crates listed as small arms and vehicle parts, routed through 3 countries. But buried deep in the logs, hidden under layers of false entries, she found it. Rounds, not many, just 12, but each listed under a code she now recognized, CMEM. Commemorative. She circled it, heart pounding. The coordinates matched a warehouse near the Bosporus. Whoever was moving them had been bold enough to tuck the ghosts into global traffic lanes. And boldness meant arrogance. Arrogance could be exploited. She briefed the task force herself, her voice steadier than she expected. Maps projected on the wall, intelligence analysts hunched over notes, operators leaning in. Sat in the back, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving her. These rounds don't move like normal contraband, explained. They're placed with care. They're messages as much as merchandise. Whoever's sending them wants us to notice. That's their mistake. We'll use that pattern to predict where they'll surface next. Colonel Harrison nodded, and Istanbul is the node. The operation launched within days. Turkish intelligence cooperated, though reluctantly. Covert teams moved in under cover of night. Wasn't on the ground. She knew she wasn't built for that, but her fingerprints were all over the plan. Every coordinate, every route, every anomaly. She sat in the operations center in Virginia, headset pressed to her ear, listening to the crackle of comms. Alpha team in position. Bravo team moving. Eyes on target, warehouse confirmed. Her chest tightened. This was different from Afghanistan. She wasn't carrying wounded men, wasn't covered in dust and blood. But the weight was the same. Lives balanced on details she had unearthed, on choices she had made. Then came the break. Contact. Shots fired inside the warehouse. Repeat shots fired. Pulse spiked. She gripped the desk until her knuckles whitened. She wasn't there. She couldn't help. All she could do was listen. The minutes dragged, shouts, gunfire, silence. Then's voice cut through, steady, grounding. Round secured, hostiles neutralized, shipment intact. Her breath released, in a rush she hadn't realized she was holding. Hours later, when the operation concluded, handed her the report. 12 rounds recovered, each one etched, each one different. One stopped her cold. Her own name. Not Blake, not her rank, just carved into brass as fine as a whisper. Her stomach lurched. Her hands shook. Someone hadn't just been planting ghosts. Someone had been watching her, marking her, folding her into the narrative she was trying to unravel. Found her later, sitting alone with the round in front of her. He sat across from her, silent for a while before speaking. They wanted you to see it, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. Why? Because you've become part of their story. whether you like it or not. She wanted to scream, wanted to hurl the round across the room, but she didn't. She stared at it until the etching blurred through her tears. Finally, she whispered, "I don't want to be part of their story." His voice softened, "Then write your own." The words lingered long after he left. In the weeks that followed, the Istanbul raid spiraled outward. Arrests across Europe, supply officers court-martialed, dealers exposed. The commemorative rounds began vanishing from circulation, locked behind layers of security herself helped design. Her name was whispered in halls now, not as a clerk but as the woman who had noticed, who had cared, who had endured. She didn't know if she liked it, but she accepted it. One evening, long after the task force had disbanded, she returned to the depot inn. The crates were still there, though others managed them now. The silence was the same, heavy and familiar. She walked the aisles slowly, letting her fingers brush the cold steel edges. At the old workbench she sat down. The stool creaked under her. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. She closed her eyes and remembered the first round. One shot, 1 mile, the way had held it, the way had known, the way her quiet life had cracked open. Her hand reached into her bag. She pulled out the round with her name etched into it. She set it on the workbench, the brass gleaming under the light. For a long time she just stared, not with anger now, not with fear, but with something steadier. Acceptance. Because she understood now, dignity wasn't in erasing ghosts. It was in carrying them, quietly, patiently, without needing recognition. She touched the round lightly with her fingertip. A breath caught in her chest, not from fear but from resolve. And in the silence of the depot, the thought came clear as a voiceover, quiet but unshakable. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply endures.